No data? No problem. With the lowest data rates in the country, have extra fun with SLT Extra GB.
For more details, call 1212.
Tonight, grave crimes against humanity. IGP Pujit Jayasundara and former Defence Secretary Hemasiri Fernando named as suspects of Easter attacks. No reprieve. President Sirisena accuses the EU and other nations of threatening Sri Lanka over decision on death penalty. Conflicting view. Chief of National Dangerous Drug Control Board says no terrorist links in Sri Lanka drug trafficking, although President Sirisena says otherwise.
We don't have direct evidences to claim that the terrorist groups are involved in trafficking.
In trouble, UN watchdog confirms Iran has breached nuclear deal stockpile limit, a move that could possibly add to friction with the United States. All these stories and much more coming up on First at 9 this Monday, the 1st of July 2019.
මුහුණ සති කීපයකට කලින් Fair and Lovely men ගෑවට පස්සේ මාක්ස් අඩු වෙලා ෆෙයානස් වැඩි වෙලා.
මාක්ස් අඩු කරලා ඔයාගේ ෆෙයානස් ස්ටෑන්ඩඩ් එක වැඩි කරගන්න. Fair and Lovely men anti marks cream.
From AdaDerana, this is AdaDerana First at 9. Live from Studio 24 in Colombo.
A very good evening and welcome to First at 9 on AdaDerana 24, Sri Lanka's news channel. I'm Katrina Chang. Now on to our top story tonight. The Attorney General directed a letter addressing to the Acting Inspector General of Police to name IGP Pujit Jayasundara and former Defence Secretary Hemasiri Fernando as suspects of the Easter attacks. In the letter, the Attorney General noted that upon consideration of facts and evidence, sufficient information were gathered to prove the excessive negligence of IGP Jayasundara and former Defence Secretary Fernando led to the fatalities and property damage on the 21st of April string of attacks. Attorney General Dapula Dilwera said in his letter called for the duo to be named as suspects of the incident and that the two officials be brought before magistrate for their criminal negligence to prevent the April 21 attacks. Their negligence amounts to what is known under international law to be grave crimes against humanity. The coordinator of the Attorney General, State Counsel Nishara Jayaratna, however, said that no response was seen forthcoming from the acting IGP pertaining to the matter, despite being advised last Thursday. Accordingly, the Attorney General had directed another letter to the acting IGP calling for reasons behind the failure to respond to the previous instructions. Now on to one of our headline-making news. The President's decision to implement the death penalty has come under the spotlight in recent days, with many international organizations such as the European Union and United Nations requesting that this decision be overturned. However, President Maithripala Sirisena stood firm in his plan to tackle the drug menace, rejecting threats of the EU exempting Sri Lanka from GSP+, whilst charging that no international organization can interfere in the country's sovereignty. President Maithripala Sirisena went on to highlight that drug traffickers played a role in the Easter Sunday attacks while playing a significant part in financing international terror organizations. The island-wide National Drug Prevention Week, which commenced on the 23rd of last month, came to a close yesterday. Marking the occasion, the Western Province Conference for National Drug Prevention was held in Colombo today under the patronage of President Maithripala Sirisena.
අද ලෝකේ රටවල් ගණනාවක් තිබෙනවා ඒ රටේ ආණ්ඩුවට මත්ද්‍රව්‍ය පාලනය කරන්න බෑ. මත්ද්‍රව්‍ය ජාවාරම්කාරෝ ඊට වඩා ප්‍රබලයි. අපි අත තියලා තියෙන්නේ පහසු කාර්යයකට නෙවෙයි. අසීරුයි අමාරුයි අභියෝගාත්මකයි භයානකයි. ජාත්‍යන්තර සංවිධාන කතා කරනවාද? යුරෝපීය යුනියන් එක EU එක කියනවා මරණීය දණ්ඩනය ක්‍රියාත්මක කළොත් GSP සහනය අපිට දෙන්නේ නැහැ කියලා බදු සහනය. ඒක තර්ජනයක්. ජාත්‍යන්තර සංවිධානයක් වේවා ලෝකේ ඕන රටක් උදව් දෙනවා නම් උදව් දෙන්න. අපි ඊටාම කාරුණිකේ උදව් බලාපොරොත්තු වෙනවා. හැබැයි රටේ ස්වාධීනත්වයට අත ගහන්න කාටවත් පුළුවන් කමක් නැහැ. මම දැක්ක ආණ්ඩුවේ ලොකු මහත්තයෙක් කියලා තියෙනවා ඒගොල්ලන්ගේ පක්ෂයේ ප්‍රතිපත්තිය මරණීය දණ්ඩනය නෙවෙයි කියලා. පක්ෂයේ ප්‍රතිපත්ති ක්‍රියාත්මක කළා නම් මේ අවුරුදු 4මාරි මේ රට මීට කොච්චර හොඳද? විපක්ෂයෙන් මම දැක්ක කියලා තියෙනවා මරණීය දණ්ඩනයට විරුද්ධයි. මේ කරන්න එපා කියලා. මේ සියලු දෙනාගෙන් මං අහනවා ප්‍රශ්නයක්. මත්ද්‍රව්‍ය නැති කරන්න මර්ධනය කරන්න දීලා තියෙන උදව්ව මොකද්ද කරලා තියෙන වැඩපිළිවෙල මොකක්ද? මේ වෙනුවෙන් කිසිම වැඩක් නොකරපු අය අද මරණීය දණ්ඩනයට දෙන්න එපා කියලා මාව නරක මිනිහෙක් කළා සමාජයට කතා කරනවා. මම නෙවෙයි මේක අධිකරණේ තීන්දුව කරලා තියෙන්නේ. ඉතින් ඒක අසංකරණ එක මම කරන්නේ. දැන් සමහර අය කියන්නේ මරණීය දණ්ඩනය දුන්නයි කියලා මත්ද්‍රව්‍ය නවතින්නේ නැහැ කියලා. සියලු දෙනා මරන්න බෑ. හැබැයි පිලිපීනේ ජනාධිපති අහුවෙන සියලු දෙනා මරුවා මත්ද්‍රව්‍ය පාවිච්චි කරනවා. මම පිලිපීනේට ගිය වෙලාවේ එතුමත් එක්ක කතා කළා. මම ඉතින් ක්‍රමේ අහගත්තා. ඒ ක්‍රමේ වුණාට මෙහෙ කරන්න බෑ. ඒ ක්‍රමේ මෙහෙ කරන්න පුළුවන් නම් මම ඒකත් කරනවා. මත්ද්‍රව්‍ය ජාවාරම් වලින් එන ආදායම් විශාල ප්‍රමාණයක් ජාත්‍යන්තර ත්‍රස්තවාදී ව්‍යාපාර වලට යනවා. මම පැහැදිලිවම කියන්නේ පහුගිය අප්‍රේල් 21 වෙනිදා ත්‍රස්ත ප්‍රහාරය පැහැදිලි ලෙසම ජාත්‍යන්තර මත්ද්‍රව්‍ය ජාවාරම්කාරීන්ට සම්බන්ධයි කියලායි මම කියන්නේ. අපි පාසල් දරුවොත් එක්ක රටේ ලස්සන වැඩසටහන් ටිකක් කරලා රට උඩට ගත්ත මත්ද්‍රව්‍ය මර්ධනය. හැබැයි ඒවා ඔක්කොම විනාශ කෙරුවා අප්‍රේල් 21 බෝම්බයත් එක්ක.
Now, contradicting views of the president who linked the involvement of drug traffickers with the recent Easter attacks, Chairman of the National Dangerous Drugs Control Board, Professor Saman Abesinghe, said that there seems to be no direct evidence between terrorist groups and drug trafficking to Sri Lanka, although internationally there is a link. Speaking to First at 9, he further highlighted there is an increasing trend in the use of illicit drugs, with last year's records indicating that there were 80,000 to 100,000 heroin addicts in Sri Lanka.
We have estimated heroin addicts, it's around 80,000 to 100,000. The other major one is the cannabis, that's about 200,000. One of the main reasons is the myth that they have regarding these drugs. They thought that they are some kind of stimulants and they have some kind of strong activities within their bodies, but they all myths. The other reason is the peer pressure.
The chairman of National Dangerous Drugs Control Board, Professor Saman Abesinghe, spoke on how illicit drugs are being smuggled into the country.
We have to understand that Sri Lanka is an island. So the main routes that's the drugs are coming in through the harbours. So we have fishery harbours island-wide. Mainly the north tip, the India, we are very close by. So Kerala ganja, that's mainly coming through the fisheries boat. The other sources are the Pakistan, Afghanistan, and also now we have some reports that they are coming through other countries as well. So that means sometimes the containers going through the Sri Lanka means the transit points. So that is also another source that these substances are coming into the country.
When asked about links with terrorist organizations with drug trafficking, Professor Abesinghe had this to say.
The involvement of the terrorist groups, we don't have direct evidences to claim that the terrorist groups are involved in trafficking. But internationally, it has been discovered that certain terrorist groups are involved with international trafficking. So we don't have direct reports to the terrorist groups. They are involved in trafficking of these substances into Sri Lanka. But in the worldwide, it is a known fact. We have two things to deal with these drug menace. The supply reduction is things that we should focus to the drugs which are coming into Sri Lanka. And we have to somehow use the maximum effort from the law enforcement authority to curtail this supply reduction. And also we have to think about the demand reduction. So we have to educate the people, especially the younger generation.
The Human Rights Watch is the latest to comment on Sri Lanka's decision to implement the death penalty. Human Rights Watch said the Sri Lanka government should halt plans to resume executions and restore its de facto 43-year moratorium on the use of the death penalty.
President Maithripala Sirisena said he was determined to crack down on drug trafficking after over 300,000 people in Sri Lanka became addicts, with 60% of 24,000 prison inmates incarcerated for drug-related offences. Recently, the president announced the signing of death warrants for 4 convicted drug traffickers, claiming it would put an end to many burning issues in the country, with poverty being one of them. In its statement, Human Rights Watch quoted its Asia Director Brad Adams commenting that Sri Lanka's plan to resume use of the death penalty is a major setback for human rights. Brad Adams also expressed disappointment over Sri Lanka wanting to join with less rights-respecting regimes despite being a bulwark against capital punishment in Asia for more than 4 decades. Adams points out that Sri Lanka should work towards upholding its human rights pledges and immediately rescind the execution orders, as death penalty is a cruel practice that has no place in modern society for combating drug crimes or any other offence. The death penalty has not been carried out in Sri Lanka since 1976. Currently, 1,299 prisoners, 1,215 men and 84 women are on Sri Lanka's death row after having been convicted for capital offences, including 48 people convicted for drug crimes.
10 fundamental rights petitions have been filed before the Supreme Court against the implementation of the death penalty. The petitions were filed by the Centre for Policy Alternatives, Professor C. Gunaratna, Dr. K. Senaratna and the attorney of several death row inmates at the Valikada prison. The Attorney General, Minister of Justice and Prison Reform, Salathatha Korala, Secretary of the Justice Ministry, Commissioner General of Prisons, Superintendent of Valikada Prison were cited as respondents of the petitions, claiming that implementation of the death penalty is a violation of basic human rights. The petitioners point out the President's decision to impose capital punishment only on the inmates convicted for drug trafficking is also a violation of Article 12(1) of the Constitution, which ensures that all persons are equal before the law and are entitled to equal protection of the law. Accordingly, the petitioners request the Supreme Court to issue an order preventing the implementation of the death penalty. Leader of the Pivituru Helorumea parliamentarian Udaya Gamampila raised questions on the testimony made by the army commander on the phone call he had received from ex-minister Rishad Badiuddin. The parliamentarian pointed out that his testimony contradicts his own statement at a previous occasion pertaining to a telephone caller who sought the release of some suspects in custody. Addressing a media briefing in Colombo today, Gamampila called for an investigation into whether the army chief was influenced by an unknown entity.
මොකද්ද හමුදාපතිතුමා කියන්නේ මන්නාරමේ ප්‍රබල ඇමතිවරයෙකු මට අත්අඩංගුවේ සිටින අය නිදහස් කරන්න කිව්වා මම කිව්වා අවුරුදු එකමාරකට පසුව මට කතා කරන්න කියලා තේරීම් කාර්යක සභාවට ආපු වෙලාවේ එතුමා කියනවා අත්අඩංගුවට ගත්ත පුද්ගලයෙක් යුද හමුදාව බාරයේ සිටිනවාද කියන එකයි රිෂාඩ් බදුර්දීන් ඇමතිවරයා දුරකථනයෙන් කතා කරලා මගෙන් ඇහුවේ සරත් ෆොන්සේක මන්ත්‍රීතුමා අහනවා එහෙනම් මේ අවුරුදු එකමාරකට පස්සේ කතා කරන්න කිව්වේ විහිළුවටද කියලා දැන් ත්‍රස්ත විමර්ශනය පැත්තකින් තියලා යුද හමුදාපති වරයා බය කරගත්ත ගෝනි බිල්ලා කවුද කියන එක සොයා බැලීම අපි හැමෝගෙම වගකීමක් වෙනවා. ඒ වගේම ෂාෆි ෂියාබ්දීන් වන්දසත්කම් කළ බවට සාක්ෂි නැහැ කියලා වෛද්‍ය පරීක්ෂණ පවත්වන්නත් කලින් පොලිසිය ගිහිලා අධිකරණයට වාර්තා කළේ කෙසේද? ජනාධිපතිතුමාට කියනවා මේ පිළිබඳ ජනාධිපති කොමිසමක් පත් කිරීමෙන් පමණමයි මේ පරීක්ෂණයේ සාධාරණ සිදු වුණා කියන විශ්වාසය ජනතාව තුළ ඇති වෙන්නේ. මොකද රිෂාඩ් බදුයිඩීන් ඇමතිවරයා අක්කර 10 ගණනක් කැලෑව විනාශ කරලා තිබියදී ඒක ඔප්පු කරගන්න බැරි රටක ඇඟ ඇතුලේ තියෙන පැලෝපීය නාලය විනාශ කළා කියන එක ඔප්පු කරගන්න පුළුවන් වේවි කියලා මම නම් විශ්වාස කරන්නේ නැහැ.
Trade unions of the Ceylon Petroleum Corporation today decided to postpone its trade union action of halting fuel supplies to the Ministry of Power and Energy until Friday this week. Trade unions expect the government to resolve issues surrounding repair work of a 5-kilometre oil pipeline which runs from the Colombo harbour to the oil storage terminal in Kolonnawa. During a meeting today between the Minister of Petroleum Resources Development, Kabi Hashim and Sipetco trade unions, it was also decided that a 4-member committee will be appointed to look into issues of residents whose homes are built on top of the dilapidated pipeline. The disruption of repair work on a 5-kilometre long pipeline which runs from the Colombo harbour to the oil storage terminal in Kolonnawa recently sparked protests by residents whose homes are built on top of the dilapidated pipeline. Trade unions of the Ceylon Petroleum Corporation charge that repairs were halted when Minister of Power and Energy Ravi Karunanaike intervened to side with the protesters. It is in this backdrop trade unions at Sipetco reached a collective decision to halt fuel supplies to the Ministry of Power and Energy effective from midnight last night. A meeting was convened this morning by Minister of Petroleum Resources Development Kabi Hashim and representatives of relevant trade unions to resolve the issue. Following the meeting, it was decided to continue repair work on the remaining 140 metres of the oil pipeline as soon as possible.
The minister also took a decision to appoint a 4-member committee to look into the grievances of affected residents in order to provide necessary relief. The 4-member committee comprised of Minister of Finance Mangala Samaraweera, Minister of Megapolis and Western Development Partly Champika Ranawaka, Minister of Highways and Road Development and Petroleum Resources Development Kabi Hashim, and Minister of Power and Energy and Business Development Ravi Karunanayaka. Speaking to media following the meeting, representatives of trade unions said that Minister Kabi Hashim presented a written document assuring that he will inform Cabinet on the recommencement of construction work on the pipeline. Based on this, the union reached a decision to postpone its trade union action to halt supply of fuel to the Minister of Power and Energy to Friday if the government fails to resolve the issue.
Now, offering clarification with regard to providing free tablets to advanced level students, the President stressed that Cabinet approval was initially granted to provide free tablets to advanced level students only as a pilot project at selected national schools. The proposal to provide tablets to A-level students island-wide was presented to the Cabinet in 2017. Now, according to a media communique by the President's Media Division today, the recommendations of the President to the proposal by the Minister of Education was to launch the program through different phases. The communique went on to say that President was also of the view that it is necessary to prevent students from accessing unnecessary websites other than required subject curriculums. Accordingly, the Cabinet was informed that measures will be taken to restrict web access outside the syllabus. It was also decided to take future steps based on the success of the pilot project. The communique further added that 5.5 billion rupees was allocated to provide tablets to students throughout the country. However, President proposed to reserve required funds for the pilot project and to utilize remaining funds to meet the urgent needs of school equipment such as desks and chairs. The President also proposed to state the precise amount of funds required for the pilot project. Hence, the tender called in 2017 should be amended according to the pilot project. The Maldives Police Service has denied reports that their Sri Lankan counterparts had not been made aware of fugitive Abdullah Latif's recapture. In a statement released last afternoon, Maldives Police said that they have communicated with the Sri Lankan authorities to get clearance to extradite Latifi after he turned himself in at Maldives Embassy on May 1st. A statement said since he had lived illegally in Sri Lanka for a long period, the Maldives government was trying to get clearance from Sri Lankan authorities and to find out if he is under investigation or wanted by the Sri Lankan authorities. The police and the foreign ministry have been working together since Latifi surrendered and expressed his wish to serve out his sentence in the Maldives. Meanwhile, on Sunday, Parliament Speaker Mohammad Nasheed said he was confident Latifi will be brought back to the Maldives, adding, quote, Abdullah Latifi is linked to something that very tragic, the killing of many, unquote. However, he contradicted the official line that Latifi surrendered on May 1st and claimed instead that Latifi had given himself up to embassy staff a day before the Easter attacks were carried out on April 21st. Well, we have more news on the other side, but we will first cross over to a short commercial break. Salary increments and other allowances for public servants proposed by Finance Minister Mangala Samaraweera in his budget for the year 2019 will come into effect from today. Now, accordingly, under the public servants salary increment, 1.1 million public servants will be entitled to receiving an interim allowance of 2,500 rupees.
The budget for the year 2019 was presented to Parliament in March by Minister of Finance Mangala Samaraweera and was passed on the 5th of April. Several proposals in the budget will come to effect today, including financial benefits to public servants, pensioners and tri-forces. Accordingly, all public servants will receive an additional monthly allowance of 2,500 rupees, while the cost of living allowance of 7,800 rupees will continue with the new allowance. The commando allowance for the members in parallel ranks of the Triforces is now increased to 5,000 rupees from 1,000 rupees at present. The rent allowance paid to Triforces members will be doubled effective today. Pensions of over 500,000 public servants retired before the 31st of December 2015 will be increased by a minimum of 2,800 rupees to a maximum 20,000 rupees. The monthly allowance for differently abled will be increased to 5,000 from 3,000 at present. 5,000 more patients suffering from kidney disease will receive the 5,000 rupee monthly allowance. According to the Ministry of Finance, government is set to spend over 39 billion rupees on the new increments and allowances.
OPEC and its allies look set to extend oil supply cuts this week, at least until the end of 2019, as Iran joined top producers Saudi Arabia, Iraq and Russia in endorsing a policy aimed at propping up the price of crude amid a weakening global economy. Iranian Oil Minister Bijan Sanghaneh told reporters today he would support prolonging output cuts by 6 to 9 months. OPEC and its allies, led by Russia, have been reducing oil output since 2017 to prevent prices from sliding amid soaring production from the United States, which has become the world's top producer this year ahead of Russia and Saudi Arabia. Fears about weaker global demand as a result of a US-China trade spat have added to the challenges faced by the 14-nation organization of the petroleum exporting countries in recent months. Benchmark Brent crude has climbed more than 25% since the start of 2019, but prices could stall as a slowing global economy squeezes demand and US oil floods the market. Meanwhile, Brent crude rose by $2 today towards the $67 per barrel as traders cited OPEC's resolve to curb output. On the stock market, Sri Lankan shares ended steady, hitting their highest close in more than a week, with the benchmark stock index 0.08% higher at 5,376.67, its highest close since June 19. Stock market turnover was 252.6 million rupees, well below this year's daily average, while foreign investors sold a net 162.9 million rupees worth of shares, extending the year-to-date net foreign outflows to 6.5 billion rupees. We have Achudan Srirangan from First Capital Holdings with today's update.
The both capital markets saw positive momentum commencement of the week. The secondary market witnessed the continued buying interest, although overall market witnessed a thin volume with a limited activities. The stock market bounced back to the positive territory on the gain made by John Keel's Holding and Sampath Bank. All share price index movement is a volatile movement, uptrend movement, trading close at an intraday high of 5,376, gaining 4 points.
Meanwhile, the Sri Lankan rupee edged up on dollar sales as month-end inward remittances surpassed greenback demand from importers. The currency edged up at 176 rupees and 35 cents per dollar, compared with Friday's close of 176 rupees to 40 to 50 cents. The rupee has risen to 0.17% last week and is up 3.6% so far this year. Here's a look at the day's forex rates. Well, we have international news right after this commercial break, so make sure you stay tuned. The UN nuclear watchdog confirmed today that Tehran has broken a stockpile limit for low-enriched uranium allowed under 2015 nuclear deal between Iran and world powers, which it called a move that could add to friction with the United States. The International Atomic Energy Agency said that Iran's total stockpile of low-enriched uranium exceeded the 300 kilogram limit allowed under the deal. Iran stepped up production of enriched uranium, which is used to make reactor fuel and potentially nuclear weapons, in response to reinstated US sanctions.
The announcement came after Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif told a news agency earlier today that Iran had crossed the 300 kilogram limit. The move marks Iran's first major departure from the unraveling agreement, a year after the US unilaterally withdrew from the accord and reimposed punishing sanctions on Tehran. Since then, Washington and Tehran have been embroiled in an escalating war of words, with fear of a possible US-Iran conflict heightened. European nations have warned that any violation will bring consequences. The deal allows for the reimposition of multilateral sanctions that were lifted in return for Iran limiting its nuclear activities. Russia's Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Rybakov meanwhile noted that Iran had warned of its move in advance and urged all parties to avoid escalation, saying the development causes regret but shouldn't be over-dramatized, and described it as a natural result of the US maximum pressure campaign against Tehran.
EU leaders meeting in Brussels was suspended today after national leaders failed to reach an agreement during 20 hours of talks on who should take over the bloc's top jobs, including successor to Commission Chief Jean-Claude Juncker. Leaders of the EU's 28 member states had appeared close to a deal, with diplomats saying Dutch socialist Frans Timmermans was lined up for the job of European Commission President. But that post was just one of 5 that need allocating, also including President of the European Central Bank. Appointment faces stiff opposition from Eastern European states and centre-right leaders from the EU's biggest political group. Juncker's successor will be responsible for proposing new EU laws, enforcing the bloc's rules and handling trade deals. All of the EU's top jobs are changing hands this year following European-wide elections in May. According to an EU official, the talks will resume tomorrow. Meanwhile, British Prime Minister Theresa May arrived for what is likely to be her last EU Council meeting yesterday. Speaking to media, Theresa May reflected on months of tough Brexit negotiations, but saying Britain's relationship with other members will remain important in the future. Members of May's Conservative Party are preparing to pick her successor, who is expected to be announced on the 23rd of this month.
Well, first of all, this is likely to be my last EU Council meeting, and obviously during the time that I've been attending these EU Council meetings, we've been discussing some of the key challenges facing not just Europe but the wider world as well. And of course we've had some tough and long discussions about Brexit. Well, I've always been very clear that I think that the best approach for the UK is to first of all ensure that we're delivering on the vote that took place in 2016, leaving the European Union, but that we do that with a good deal so we can do it in an orderly way. I still think we negotiated a good deal. I wasn't able to get a majority in Parliament for that deal. It will be up to my successor to get that majority, deliver on the vote and take us forward.
Afghan security forces today were battling Taliban gunmen who stormed a building in the capital Kabul after a bomb-laden truck exploded near the defense ministry at Russia, injuring at least 100 people, including 35 children. According to the spokesperson of the country's interior ministry, the Taliban claimed responsibility for the attack. The attack comes as US Special Peace Envoy for Afghanistan Zalmay Khalilzad holds a 7th round of peace talks with the Taliban Islamist militant group in Qatar, aimed at bringing an end to the 18-year war in Afghanistan. The talks, described by one US official as a make-or-break moment, have focused on issues ranging from counter-terrorism and withdrawal of foreign troops to an intra-Afghan dialogue and a comprehensive ceasefire. On the ICC World Cup, Sri Lanka, with a slither of hope, largely depending on Pakistan, Bangladesh and England losing their respective matches, walked into the Riverside ground to to play against the West Indies today. Being invited to bat first, Sri Lanka got off to a good start with the opening pair scoring 93 for the first wicket. Sri Lankan youngster Avishka Fernando scored his maiden ODI century, while Kusal Perera contributed with 64 runs, leading Sri Lanka to the highest total of its World Cup campaign this year, 338. Chasing 339, West Indies are currently on 143 for the loss of 4 wickets. On to netball, Melanie Vijay has scored 106 goals as Sri Lanka put on a possible record-setting performance as they defeated Nepal 136-7 in their second match of the 11th Asian Youth Netball Championship 2019, played at the Kashima Sports Centre in Japan. Sri Lanka got started from the first whistle and displayed solid skills throughout the game without allowing the opponents much to score. Sri Lanka will next play Thailand on 3rd of July. And with that, we conclude this edition of First at 9. As always, thank you for joining us and have a pleasant evening.